Hello everyone, I'm Hanjit Dalwal, Senior Product Marketing Manager for Windows Commercial. I'm back at Microsoft headquarters in Redmond, Washington to do another great episode, and this time on printing, cloud printing. With me, I have a special guest, Braden Petruk, Senior Program Manager for Universal Print. Welcome.
Thanks, Harjit.
So, printing is still an essential job function, right? One of the last things for organizations to actually handle, to get to, to do digital transformation, to get to the cloud and things like that, is their printing infrastructure. How does cloud printing fit into this, and what can you talk about here?
Yeah, so we hear from a lot of IT admins that infrastructure they need to manage is really costly, really time-consuming, really challenging. They have print servers to manage. You need someone to manage those, potentially many people to manage those in a large organization. You have updates to worry about. When do we switch to them? Which one do we want to be on? The networking to worry about. Do my users need to be on a VPN? Do they need to understand all these small details just to connect to a printer and print to it? And then you have identity. That's a really big thing to bring along as well. A lot of customers, the reason that's the last thing that they transition to the cloud is because it's really challenging to merge your cloud and local identities, which is the case for a lot of customers. And so cloud printing really helps with that. It really helps bridge the gap between those print devices that are actually printing pieces of paper and the cloud applications and identity and networking that everything else is moving to.
Okay, that's interesting that you mentioned about identity. So that touched upon the security aspects of printing. In my previous role, prior to Microsoft, I was IT admin. I was managing about 700 physical printers. I mean, in my organization, I had probably about 6 or 7 print servers. So it was almost like a full-time job, right? There were a couple of aspects of security or let's say, implementing identity functionality. You had specific IT admins you needed to provide access to manage and configure. Then you had end users, like which printers could they print to, which ones they could not. And I was in a higher education organization, so you had students as well. You had paid printing, that was in the mix. So there was a lot of things like that. So can you get a little deeper into this whole identity space?
Yeah, so one of the most challenging things we see for moving to the cloud specifically is this local identity, which is managed on your print servers and synchronized among them. Synchronizing that with, as you're transitioning to the cloud, you're starting to use a bunch of Microsoft Entra ID natively in the cloud for all of your Office applications, your emailing, your Teams, your SharePoint, everything else you're using is using this cloud identity. But the printers, and like you said, all of this access control that you've set up over many years and all of these complicated systems, they still rely on this directory on print servers distributed around wherever your infrastructure is.
Right.
And so reasoning with that, making sure that the identity is the same across both of those environments, especially when you're talking about access control, it's just challenging. And it can be fraught with issues. It takes time. You need to understand it. It adds complexity. And so just having all of that in one place, either local or the cloud, is something that everyone's chasing.
Right. For me, one of the biggest benefits is eliminating, on-premises infrastructure that you don't need to manage or handle, right? I used to, again, prior to my current role at Microsoft, I was working with, very large customers at Microsoft, and we had customers that I had conversations with and had advisories with, where they had moved everything to the cloud. They had Windows clients and servers to Azure and stuff like that. The one thing that they had left was their printing infrastructure, and they did not know what to do with that. And this segues into universal print, right? So that's when I introduced universal print to them and started talking to them about the benefits of it, how easy it is, and that's their, that they were like floored with the solutions that we had. So let's dive into that. Universal print, right? It's cloud printing, right?
Yeah.
But it's Microsoft's solution. So explain what universal print is.
Yeah, so universal print is Microsoft's approach to cloud printing. It is built into Windows. So for end users, you can get into cloud printing. This is part of that transition piece. The transition is both for IT admins and all of the staff, as well as the people who are actually going to be printing things. Someone at your company might have just figured out finally how to print last week. They just finally got it working, and now they know and they feel like an expert, and all of a sudden you tell them, hey, you gotta go use this other thing, this other process.
Yes.
For universal print, it's baked into Windows. You print the same way you've always printed. There's no learning curve for the users.
Right.
In fact, it's actually easier for the users because with universal print, each printer can be configured with a location. So you can actually say where it is on planet Earth. And when you're looking for a printer, we can show you the printers that are nearby. So that printer that's just down the hall there will be the first one on the list. So that when you're going to install a printer in Windows, that's the one you'll find, because that's the one you're probably wanting to use right now.
Are you trying to say that printing is not dead?
Printing is definitely not dead. We see billions of print jobs as Microsoft across our products. There are many different kinds of companies that print, right? I think what a lot of people think about when we talk about printing is someone inside of a company who every now and then they need to print a ticket that they're going to scan when they go to their concert,
right.
or some piece of a document that they want to highlight, or just kind of things you need to print occasionally for your own reasons. But a lot of companies, they print for different reasons. So
right.
there's companies that you think
Printing
of an accounting
labels.
firm, yeah, printing labels in a factory, right? Or printing receipts in a store, or an accounting firm that needs to print invoices and,
right.
and all kinds of transactional things.
But we have seen a lot of these, physical things, whether it's like labels is one thing, but a lot of people say, but we got to print because we got to get signatures, we got to get sign-offs, but now we got this digital, signatures and stuff. But printing is still essential for any organization. How does universal print in the cloud printing space? What are the benefits and things like that, and how do people transition into it?
Yeah, so one of the things our own IT department loved about switching to universal print was, again, this being built into Windows. There was no deployments needed onto everyone's machine for some new software or some new driver to run it. They were able to kind of seamlessly and gradually transition. That's something they really liked. They rolled it out regionally across different buildings, different regions, to make sure everything was good and they weren't disrupting the environment. And they did that by using the connector that we have. So we have this connector software that can take any existing printer and register it with universal print.
That's for, what do you call that, non-universal print ready printers.
Yes.
Right.
Exactly. So we have this new class of printers that have been updated. They can talk directly to universal print. Those are always going to provide the best experience and the kind of the most direct link, and also the best way to fully remove all of that infrastructure that everyone really wants to remove when they think about cloud printing. But the connector is a great transitional piece, and it's a great way to make use of all of the infrastructure that you have invested in and built up over the years.
Right.
And so that's what we used internally to transition a lot of our infrastructure gradually.
So just to explain to folks here, when we're talking about universal print ready printers and not, and you just mentioned that UP ready printers join universal print. It means really that you're registering those printers to Azure, right?
Yeah, so we have our universal print service running up in the cloud in Azure, and we need a way to connect that printer on the floor that's going to shoot your piece of paper out with the servers that are running in the cloud and processing those jobs.
Right.
And so there are two ways to do that. One way is that the printer talks directly to the service, and it has its own identity, which is a big part of Zero Trust, actually, that this printer has its own identity and that those communications are well known. And the other option is to have another infrastructure component that runs either on a machine within your intranet or on a VM somewhere, for example.
That's the connector.
That's the
like
connector.
That, right.
And the connector essentially you can discover printers on your network by installing them on the machine where the connector is running. And then that connector can pick up all those printers.
Yeah, it just acts like a proxy.
Gives the printers an identity and registers them with the cloud.
Yeah, no, that's great. So a couple of things that I really liked what you mentioned earlier was, it's built into, Windows and organizations that really have it and they don't realize that they have it. And one of the reasons is it's part of the Windows 11 E3 licensing or E5, right?
Yes.
And then the other thing is you don't need printed drivers.
Absolutely.
So let's get into that a little bit, talk about that for maybe 30 seconds here. What does that mean, no drivers?
Yeah, so two of the biggest pains of having drivers, one is maintaining them. You need to know which driver should be installed and running for each given printer that you have and based on the exact version of the operating system you have. Got to make sure those are up to date so you're getting the best security and performance that's available out of them. So that's one thing. The second thing is security as a whole. So drivers run in a pretty privileged environment where they have access to a lot of functionality. And so that makes them a target that's ripe for exploits and also for issues. So the removal of those drivers, we do that by supporting the IPP protocol, which is a standard set of functionality across many printers.
Okay.
So removing the driver removes those risks and at the same time makes for a more consistent experience across all of your printers.
Absolutely.
Without needing to do all that management and stuff.
I know the pain points about drivers because I manage those print servers and you had a particular brand, but you had many different models, just like airlines, like airplanes, right? Yeah. You got the, there's Boeing and Airbus or whatever it is, right? You got the different, so it was really challenging. And if you install the wrong print driver on your print server, it could affect many same model printers and things like that. All right, so security. I want to get into security. So for IT professionals, there's always a concern for them, and also end users, right? So IT is like, all right, how does this work? Is like my CEO printing like really critical things going to be exposed? End users as well, right? People print at work and things like that, whether it's their child's report card or whatever. How are we handling security with Universal Print?
Yeah, so one of the biggest concerns we see, especially with the move to cloud, is the notion that your documents and your data are leaving your device and going to the cloud, and totally understand the customers want to keep that safe. So we have a ton of provisions in place to make sure that everything that goes through Universal Print is well secured. One of those is that we share the same infrastructure that Office, Teams, Exchange, SharePoint, OneDrive, all of these world-class security leading services that you use today are backed by.
Yeah.
We run on the same infrastructure. We have the same certifications, the same compliance provisions in place as an operator in that environment. So that means we use HTTPS everywhere, TLS 1.2. We're encrypted everywhere in transit and at rest. And we are also certified now with FedRAMP in the government environment.
Oh.
So the government actually can now use Universal Print, and we meet a broad spectrum of security controls that are required by the government.
That's excellent. Yeah, so if the government's using it, that's pretty high.
Yeah.
Pretty good.
Absolutely.
All right, so awesome stuff on security. So we know it's secured, and we have many other features. People just think, oh, universal print is just a matter of like click print, boom, done, kind of a thing. But it is like Windows 11. You got various features within it. Let's talk about some of those, right? So we had some recent announcements, and we are also have some new things coming about, soon. What are some of the things that we recently announced as part of Universal Print?
Yeah, we're working on a ton of stuff. When I look at our print customers, a print environment kind of seems like a fingerprint to me almost. Like every customer is different. They have a totally different set of needs and requirements that they need for printing. But among those, there are a few big things that kind of always come to the surface as the biggest needs. So one of the things we recently released was secure release.
Secure release.
Secure
Okay.
release. So that means that when a customer is printing something, the user that printed it needs to be at the physical device to release the job.
Right.
So right now that is by using a QR code. So you walk up to the printer, scan a QR code on the printer, and once you do that, any jobs that are meant for you are available to release at that printer.
Okay. So what happens if, let me ask you this question. So I send a bunch of, print jobs to a printer and I didn't go and get them. I just forgot. It's been there for weeks, whatever, and I don't need it anymore. What happens in that situation?
So those print jobs will eventually expire.
Okay.
And one awesome thing about that, which customers love, is that actually saves a lot of money and a lot of environmental impact. Because those print jobs, if they were not secure release jobs, if they just came out of the printer, they would at some point get scooped up into the trash bin,
Right.
or the shredding bin, or whatever, and who knows what they were.
Right. So you're using up paper, you're using up, toners and stuff like that. When you mention about expiration of those print jobs, is that something that IT can configure? But is it a default setting, or is it something that they can change? For example, expire after 24 hours or expire after, 3 hours. How does that work?
So as of today, it's a default, and print jobs that are have been in the system for more than 10 days will be expired.
I see. 10 days. Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah.
All right. So what else we got? We got number of print jobs.
Yes.
That's a big one.
Yes. So recently in Microsoft 365 E3 and E5, we increased the number of print jobs to 100, up from 5.
From 5.
From 5
Per user.
per user.
Right.
And so these jobs are pooled at the user level, or at the tenant level, rather. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about kind of print jobs in general, a lot of customers kind of think about jobs at a per user level. But what we see is typically at an organization level. So let's say you have 1,000 users.
Right.
And all of those get 100 jobs. So now you have 100,000 jobs. And across a whole tenant full of those jobs, we typically see that most of our enterprise what we call information work customers, that is more than enough printing for what they need. So that actually ends up saving a lot of money because they don't need to pay per printer.
Right. So that was one of the things when I used to work with customers when we had that 5 print job, set up, and they were like, but it's only 5, but we got users printing 100 and so on. I said no, but it's actually collectively whole tenant, right? So you can have one user printing 5 or 2, another one printing 500. It just all comes out in the wash. It's like a pool of print jobs, but we've increased that now. So just to set a nice level base here.
And we've been getting that feedback a lot. So when the print jobs used to be 5, some customers were saying that wasn't quite enough.
Okay.
And so even after this latest release for Microsoft 365 E3 and E5 customers, Business Premium was also saying, hey, we need this.
Right.
We do very similar kinds of printing, and we need a little bit more volume to meet our needs. So as of Ignite this year, we are announcing that also business premium licenses will be increased from 5 to 100 jobs per user per month as well.
Okay. What about, so you talked about government earlier. So we also have, we just recently announced the availability for universal print in GCC and GCC High, right?
Yeah.
So government organizations can now utilize universal print. Anything else that's coming up, or what's our roadmap on universal print here?
Yeah, lots of good stuff coming. We have, so one of the things we hear a lot about, especially in our larger customers, is that the kind of the hierarchy of who manages what is more complicated.
Okay.
So you might have an IT admin in, let's say, the US region,
Right.
that is managing the printers in the US region. But in other countries and other regions around the world, they might have different IT staff that are managing printers for those regions.
Right.
So we have a new feature called delegated admin
Okay.
that essentially allows that print management to be delegated to different individuals. So different sets of printers are under the purview of different admins who now have the capacity to register their own printers, as well as configure the options and access control.
Oh, that's a nice feature. That's
on
a nice,
printers in a specific region.
Oh, in a specific region.
Yeah.
Okay. And then end users sending print jobs to any printer, whatever. What's
Yeah.
that? What we got for that?
So that kind of technology is called pull printing.
Okay.
And we noticed a lot that one of the biggest complaints from users is that when they're printing, they just want to print something.
Right.
They don't know where it's going. You see this printer down the hall. It's in 1941V.
There might be like 3 of them there. You don't know. Yeah.
Right. Which one is? I see all these printers in Windows, and I see these printers over here. How do I get it to go to that one?
Yeah.
So what pull printing allows us to do is the user just prints. You send the document into the ether, and whenever you're ready, maybe it's now, or maybe you were printing during a meeting and you want to go pick it up after the meeting, you just walk over to any printer and scan the QR code, and it will show you all of the print jobs that are available for you to pick up.
Okay.
And you
that's
release
awesome.
them, and then they print out for you.
I'm so relieved because now I can confidently send my chicken curry recipe print jobs and not worry about someone picking them up and oh, what's he doing? You see? So no, this is awesome, right? I mean, that's one of the worries, right? Usually end users have that, right? Or even like IT admins, right? Hey, we got our leadership or CEOs and stuff. They need to print specific things and stuff, and is that going to be in the eyes of somebody else? And it's not. We've got that solved,
Yeah.
right? So
And they have enough things to worry about,
exactly.
let alone picking which printer they want to print to.
Right, right. So the other one that I want to touch upon, which we haven't talked about yet, is how are we supporting Mac OS, iOS, Android, anything other than the Windows space for universal print?
Yeah, so universal print is called universal print, right? So we think it should work anywhere the user is. Wherever they're working, they should be able to print using universal print. So one of the things it's in private preview right now, and it's very imminently in public preview, is printing from macOS. So we now have a universal print application that can be installed on macOS, and it can be easily deployed through MDM. And this app allows macOS users who are signed in, so they can sign in. Maybe they signed in through Office, or maybe they signed in through Teams on their Mac already. It allows them to, again, sign into Universal Print using their same identity they would have used on Windows or any other device they're signed in through. And they can access all of the Universal Print printers that are available in the cloud and install them on their device. And then once they're on the device, you can print from any application the same way, kind of like how we were talking about in Windows. One of the goals is that there's no learning curve for the users. So once those printers are on their machine, they print just like they would have printed to any printer before.
Back in my day, when I was telling you about my IT admin role, trying to provide printers, shared printers that were installed on, print servers for Mac users was challenging. They had to do direct IP printing, stuff
Yeah.
like that. And then they had to manage their own, I guess, drivers and stuff like that for that. So this is great. This is awesome. We just want to make it simple and easier and
Yeah,
go from
this
there.
removes all of that complexity.
Yeah. So you also touched upon a little bit about private preview, public preview, and stuff like that. Is this something that our customers are able to find out and join?
Yeah, so after Ignite, the private preview app will be available in the App Store. So either end users can go install the app themselves, or the IT admins can actually deploy that app.
Okay.
As a normal App Store app, they can deploy it to whichever machines it should be deployed to, and then users will have that app automatically. The cool thing about this app is it actually exposes an extension in system settings for macOS.
Oh.
So in Windows, when you want to go manage your printers, you go in settings, you go to printers,
Right.
and you can add whichever printers you need there. It'll be very similar. So in macOS, you go in settings, you go to Universal Print in settings, you sign in, and all of your printers are there and ready to go.
Fantastic. So basically, the biggest giveaways, printing is not dead.
Not by a long shot.
Right? So IT pros and decision makers can, now easily move, to the cloud using, cloud printing, Universal Print. Universal Print offers lots of layers of security, right? It keeps the ease of mind and things like that, and it's also easily manageable with Intune. And so you can manage it from anywhere. You don't have to be, at a specific location and things like that. So great stuff, easy for end users to use it. They don't have to figure things out. There's no huge learning curve. So lots of great takeaways from here. Is there anything else you want to add?
I think you covered it pretty well. I think simplicity is top of mind for us, making it simple for admins and end users. Security, just making sure that when customers trust Universal Print with their data, that we're handling that in the best way possible. And cost as well. We think that cloud solutions and Universal Print can drive down the cost of managing print, which is kind of an infrastructure that exists at every company. Right. So the simpler, more secure, and more cost-effective we make that, every company stands to benefit from it.
Okay, so finally, how does someone find out about Universal Print? Where do they go?
Best way to go, the best place to go is Microsoft Learn. So we have a short link, aka.ms/updocs, and that will take you directly to where you can learn more about how to get deployed. And
excellent. That's everything in there, how to get it set up, how to use
Yes.
it, all sorts of things. Fantastic. So not only that people can go to the awesome link that you just shared, right? One-stop shop for everything, but we got some great sessions coming up too, right? At Ignite and Technical Takeoff. You want to mention a little bit about that?
Yeah, so at Ignite, we're going to announce and kind of elaborate on a bunch of the stuff we talked about today.
Awesome.
And at Tech Takeoff, we have a session that's going to deep dive on security, on the security aspect, and really kind of dive into those details that everyone cares about.
Fantastic. So people, please watch this. Make sure you check it out. Look for all this information on all the social media channels. Find these sessions, join them. You're going to learn a ton. All right? Braden, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for talking to me. I learned a lot as well, right? Especially the security concepts of Universal Print. And fantastic. I can't wait to see where we go even further with printing.
Yeah, it was awesome to hear your input as a former IT admin too. So this is great. Thank you so much. It was really fun.
All right. Thank you for watching Tackling Tech. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you have any suggestions for future episodes, please let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, and we'll see you next time.